It sits on the shelf of history like a lead weight.
Hmm.
It's arguably the most infamous book ever written, a title that is, just synonymous with evil itself.
Absolutely.
And yet, and this is the thing that really struck me when we started looking into this, statistically speaking, almost nobody has actually read it.
Which, to be fair, is usually for the best. It is incredibly dense, it wanders all over the place, and frankly, the content is nauseating.
We are talking, obviously, about Mein Kampf, my struggle.
But we aren't just doing a book club on a dictator's memoir today. That would be grim enough.
Right.
We are looking at a deep dive based on a very specific source, a transcript of a video titled, "I Read Hitler's Book in 2025. And it's the subtitle of that video that really grabbed me.
What was it?
It just said, "It scared me for us."
That is the hook right there, because usually when we talk about this era, the 1920s, the rise of the Third Reich, we treat it like a museum piece.
Yeah, it's history. It's under glass.
It's a dusty artifact under glass. But the source is arguing something much more urgent. They are arguing that this book wasn't just a memoir, it was a blueprint.
A step-by-step instruction manual.
Exactly. An instruction manual for the Second World War and the Holocaust, written years before a single tank rolled across a border.
And the terrifying part, the part that addresses that 2025 in the title, is the argument that history is rhyming. That if you actually read the text, the rhetorical tricks, the specific framing of us versus them, the attacks on institutions, it all feels uncomfortably familiar right now.
We are absolutely going to get to those modern echoes, and I know that is going to be a heavy discussion. But to understand the rhyme, we first have to understand the original verse.
You have to.
We have to go back to the origin story, because the context of where this book was written completely changes how you understand it.
Right. We need to transport ourselves back to April 1st, 1924.
Okay, set the scene for us. Because when I think of Hitler in 1924, I know he is in prison. He just failed at the beer hall putsch, that chaotic attempt to overthrow the government in Munich.
Total failure, yeah.
So I'm picturing, I don't know, a dungeon, solitary confinement, rats scuttling across the floor.
And that is exactly where the myth begins. We assume he was rotting away in some dark hole, suffering for his cause. But the source paints a picture that is, well, it's shocking.
How so?
He was in Landsberg Prison, yes. But the conditions, it was less like a penitentiary and more like a hotel stay with a security guard at the front gate.
A hotel? He was convicted of high treason.
He was.
That usually comes with a blindfold and a cigarette, not room service.
Well, he was convicted, yes. But you have to remember who the judges were. These were conservative, nationalist judges who secretly, or not so secretly, sympathized with him. They didn't see a traitor who tried to topple the republic. They saw a patriotic troublemaker. Someone with his heart in the right place, even if his methods were a bit loud.
So they slapped him on the wrist.
Barely even that. I mean, think about this. The source points out they could have deported him back to Austria. Remember, he wasn't a German citizen yet.
He was an Austrian national.
Austrian national. They could have kicked him out and saved the world a lot of trouble. They didn't.
Oh, what did they do?
Instead, they gave him a room with a view. He wasn't on bread and water. He was receiving a constant stream of visitors, admirers, party members.
So he was holding court in prison?
He was. And the source mentions that he received so many food parcels, so many gifts from admirers, fruit baskets, wine, sausages, that he actually gained weight while incarcerated.
It's such a bizarre image. You have this self-proclaimed revolutionary hero, the man of struggle, sitting there getting fat on gift baskets from his fans.
Precisely. It undermines the hardened warrior myth immediately, doesn't it?
Completely.
But even with all the comfort, he had a major problem. And this is crucial for understanding why the book exists at all.
Okay.
Hitler's superpower, really the only thing he had going for him at this point, was his voice.
He was an orator.
A powerful one. He fed off the energy of the crowd. He needed the applause, the shouting, the rallies.
And prison took the microphone away.
Exactly. He was silenced. He was cut off from the adrenaline of the beer halls. He needed a way to keep his grip on the National Socialist movement, which, by the way, was falling apart without him.
So he needed to project his voice beyond the prison walls.
He had to. So he decided to write. He needed to define his Weltanschauung.
His worldview.
He wanted to create the Bible for his movement, a foundational text. And what the source points out, which I found fascinating, is that he doesn't bury the lead. Not at all.
He gets right to it.
He reveals his ultimate geopolitical goal in the very first paragraph of the book, sentence 1.
That's Unusual. Usually politicians hide their real goals behind layers of rhetoric. What does he say?
He starts by mentioning his birthplace, a tiny town called Braunau am Inn. Now, to you and me, that is just a dot on a map. But for him, the geography was destiny. He writes, "This little town lies on the border between two German states, the union of which seems a task to which we should dedicate our lives."
Two German states? He means Germany and Austria.
Anschluss, the unification. He is writing this in 1924. He doesn't actually achieve it until 1938, 13, 14 years later. Yeah. But there it is on page 1. We must unite these lands.
It really validates that blueprint idea from the source, doesn't it? If people had just read the opening page, they would have known his foreign policy wasn't about diplomacy, it was about absorption.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
But the book is difficult. It's dense. It's rambling. And it's split into 2 parts.
What are they?
The first part is autobiographical, or at least it pretends to be. It is framed like a hero's journey, a coming-of-age story of a young man struggling against a world that doesn't understand him.
But the source calls him an unreliable narrator.
It does.
Which feels like a polite literary term for a liar.
That puts it mildly. I mean, he treats his own life like propaganda clay. He sculpts it to fit the narrative he needs.
Give me an example.
The source digs into one line in particular that completely undermines his German hero persona. It is about his move to Munich before World War I.
The story usually goes that he moved to Germany because he loved the fatherland so much, right?
The myth.
He hated the multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian Empire, he hated the diversity, and wanted to be with real Germans.
That is the story he tells in Mein Kampf, a patriot migrating to the motherland to serve the cause. The reality. The source checked the records. Hitler fled Austria because the authorities were looking for him. He was a draft dodger.
Wait, just hold on. The man who plunged the world into the biggest war in history, the man who demanded every German fight to the death, ran away to avoid military service.
Is a mess of irony. The source explains that he ignored the draft notices for the Austrian army until he literally crossed the border to escape them.
So his whole ideology is built on struggle and war.
And his origin story is built on running away from duty because he didn't like the specific army calling his name. It's a huge contradiction, right at the heart of his personal myth.
But he did fight eventually in World War I for Germany.
He did. And this is where the psychology gets really interesting and where we start to see the formation of his actual philosophy.
Okay.
Most people, when they wrote about WWI in the 1920s, think of a book like All Quiet on the Western Front. They described it as a meat grinder.
Hell on earth. Okay. Pointless slaughter where a generation was wiped out for nothing. Mud, gas, rats, trenches, total misery.
Yeah, exactly. Hitler describes it as the most memorable period of my life.
He loved it.
He found belonging in it. You have to remember, before the war, he was a drifter, a failed artist living in hostels in Vienna. He was a nobody.
Just completely anonymous.
Completely. Suddenly the war gave him a uniform. It gave him a number. It gave him a purpose. He was part of something. He was injured twice, blinded by gas once, and received the Iron Cross for bravery.
So for him, the war wasn't trauma, it was validation.
The source argues that the trenches didn't traumatize him in the traditional sense. They solidified him. They convinced him that life is war. That struggle is the natural state of things.
Which leads us right into the core philosophy of the book. You mentioned struggle. Mein Kampf. My struggle. It seems like he views struggle not just as a hardship to overcome, but as a fundamental law of nature.
It is the central engine of his universe. There's a quote the source pulls out that really sums it up. He writes, "He who would live must fight, and he who doesn't wish to fight in this world of permanent struggle has no right to live."
Has no right to live. That isn't a political statement. That is a biological death sentence for pacifists or for the weak.
It is. And to understand where he gets this, the source takes us on a bit of a detour. We have to go back to 1835, to a young biologist on a ship, a man named Charles Darwin.
Okay, hold on. We are drawing a line from the HMS Beagle and the Galapagos Finches all the way to the Third Reich.
It is a distorted line, but it is there. You see, Darwin observes nature. He sees that species adapt. Survival of the fittest. It is a biological observation about how nature works over millions of years.
Right.
But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people started applying that biological theory to human sociology.
Social Darwinism.
Exactly. The idea is, if nature is a brutal competition where the strong eat the weak, why should human society be any different? Why should we have welfare? Why should we protect the sick? Aren't we just weakening the herd by doing that?
It's a terrifying logic.
It is, and Hitler takes that logic and runs with it. He views humanity not as one species, but as different breeds fighting for territory and resources.
So he creates a racial hierarchy.
A rigid one. At the top, he places the Aryan. He calls them the culture creators, the noble blood, the master race. And at the bottom, he places Slavs, and most importantly for his ideology, the Jews.
And he doesn't just call them enemies, does he? The language is specific.
Very specific. He refers to them as parasites, as a bacillus, a pathogen.
He's turning them into a disease.
Precisely. And if you follow that logic, if the state's goal isn't to build roads or fix the economy, but to win this biological war,
then the whole point of government changes.
the role of the government becomes breeding. The source calls it the Völkisch state, the ethnic state. Hitler wrote that a people doesn't perish from losing a war. They perish from the loss of the power of resistance that only pure blood possesses.
This gets us into the topic of eugenics. And I think this is where the source material really challenges our standard view of history.
How so?
We tend to think of eugenics as this uniquely Nazi evil, something that started and ended with Hitler. But the source points out it was trendy.
It is a very uncomfortable truth for the Western world. The source emphasizes that Hitler wasn't hallucinating this idea in a vacuum. He was riding a global wave. In the 1920s, eugenics was considered progressive science in many circles.
Progressive? That seems so counterintuitive.
It does now. But at the time, people saw it differently. The source points to the UK specifically, but also the US. The Fabian Society in the UK, these were left-wing progressives, mind you, were openly discussing how to breed humans with the same logic we use for horses or cattle.
And it wasn't just fringe groups.
Not at all. Even Winston Churchill.
Churchill, the man who saved the world from Hitler.
The source notes that Churchill considered sterilization for risk groups. The logic at the time, and we have to understand this to see how the world went off the rails, was utilitarian.
What was the argument?
They thought, we eradicated smallpox with vaccines. Why can't we eradicate stupidity or hereditary disease or criminality by controlling who has kids? They saw it as a public health issue.
They thought they were helping nature along, like gardeners pruning a tree.
They thought they were pruning the dead branches to make the tree stronger. But Hitler took that garden metaphor and turned it into an industrial slaughterhouse.
He didn't just want to encourage healthy marriages.
No. He wanted to mandate sterilization for anyone with syphilis, tuberculosis, or any hereditary disability. He took these theoretical ideas floating around Europe and made them state policy.
The source used a phrase that sent a shiver down my spine. Lethal chambers.
That was the term floating around to these intellectual circles in Europe. The idea that society shouldn't waste resources on the defective.
So it was just a debate for them.
It was theoretical for the Fabians, a philosophical exercise. But when the Nazis came to power, they stopped treating it as a debate. They operationalized it. They built the chambers.
The numbers are just staggering.
They are. After 1933, the Nazis sterilized 400,000 people against their will. They murdered 70,000 people in mental institutions and care homes. They murdered 5,000 disabled children, all in the name of this twisted science of strengthening the racial body.
It is just devastating. But here's the question that I think always haunts this topic. You have this guy writing this hateful book in prison. He is a draft dodger, a failed coup leader. He has these evil but also kind of fringe ideas. How does he get millions of normal people teachers, bakers, doctors to go along with this?
Right.
How do you go from the fruit basket prisoner to the dictator of Germany?
That is the why. And to answer that, the source quotes Karl Marx, surprisingly. Men make their own history, but under circumstances they don't choose.
The perfect storm.
Exactly. You have to look at the German mindset after World War I. This was a traumatized nation. 1.8 million dead soldiers. 2.7 million permanently disfigured.
I can't even imagine that. Walking down the street in Berlin and every third or fourth man you see is missing a limb or has a horrific facial disfigurement.
It was everywhere. A constant visible reminder of failure and loss. And psychologically, these men were returning as losers. They had been conditioned for 4 years of extreme violence in the trenches, and now they were back in a society that had lost. They had no purpose.
So what did they do?
Many of them joined the Free Court.
These were the paramilitary groups, right? The private armies.
Right. It was a way for them to keep the uniform on, in a sense. It allowed them to cosplay as soldiers again. It gave them a structure, a sense of belonging, and an enemy. They were breeding grounds for right-wing nationalism.
And in this environment, a specific conspiracy theory took root. The Dolchstoß legend.
The stab-in-the-back myth.
This is crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely crucial. The myth was that the German army was never actually defeated on the battlefield. They were undefeated. They were standing strong.
Which was a complete fantasy.
A total lie. The military leadership knew they were beaten. They were on their knees. But the myth claimed they were betrayed at home, stabbed in the back, by Jews, socialists, and corrupt politicians who sabotaged the war effort.
And if you're a soldier who sacrificed everything, that lie is very appealing.
Think about the psychology. What is easier to accept? That you were simply beaten by a better army, that your sacrifice was for nothing, or that you were an undefeated hero who was betrayed by a traitor?
The lie protects your ego. It turns shame into rage.
Exactly. It turns shame into anger. And anger can be mobilized. Hitler understood this perfectly. He used that anger. And then he poured gasoline on it with the Treaty of Versailles.
The war guilt clause.
Article 231. It blamed Germany entirely for the war. It demanded massive, crippling reparations, took away huge chunks of territory. It was intended to humiliate. And Hitler used that humiliation as his primary recruitment tool for years.
So you have trauma, a conspiracy theory, and national humiliation.
A potent cocktail.
Well,
But, and this is a huge but that the source emphasizes, even with all that anger, people still weren't buying what he was selling. Not in large numbers, not yet.
why not?
Because people don't usually vote for radicals when their fridge is full and they can pay their rent.
It always comes back to the economy.
It does. And that brings us to the real kicker. The thing that pushed Germany over the edge wasn't just national pride. It was the economy. Specifically, the hyperinflation of 1923.
The source has some stats on this that are they're hard to process. They don't feel real.
Let's look at them. January 1st, 1923. $1 gets you 7,000 German marks, which is already terrible inflation. That means imported goods are incredibly expensive.
Okay, bad, but maybe manageable. But by December...
September 1st, that same year, $1 cost 4.2 trillion marks.
4.2 trillion. I mean, money stopped being money. It was just paper.
It became trash. The source describes people using wheelbarrows to carry cash just to buy a loaf of bread. There are stories of people ordering a coffee, and by the time they finished drinking it, the price had doubled.
Your life savings could be wiped out in an afternoon.
People were making clothes out of curtains because they couldn't afford fabric. The entire social contract was broken. If you worked hard your whole life and saved your money, you were ruined.
Yeah.
If you were a speculator or in debt, you were suddenly rich. It was total chaos.
And chaos breeds extremism.
That is the crucial correlation the source makes. In 1923, during this absolute misery, the Nazi Party exploded. They grew from 8,000 to 55,000 members almost overnight. People were desperate.
But then, things got better.
They did. And this is the part of the history we often forget. Between 1924 and 1928, the economy stabilized. They call it the Golden Twenties. America loaned Germany money, the inflation stopped, there was a cultural boom, and what happened to the Nazis?
They shrank.
They became a joke, a fringe group. In the 1928 election, they got just 2.63% of the vote. They were completely irrelevant.
That is such a powerful lesson. When people were fed and safe and optimistic, they didn't want the hate.
Precisely. Extremism dies in stability. It needs chaos to breathe. But then came 1929.
The Great Depression.
The American stock market crashed, the loans to Germany were recalled, and the chaos returned with a vengeance. Unemployment skyrocketed. Banks failed. And suddenly, Mein Kampf became a bestseller again. It made Hitler so rich he could refuse his salary when he became chancellor.
So he didn't create the wave, he just knew how to surf it.
He was a master marketer. The source calls him a marketer of hate. And what's disturbing is how modern his marketing rules sound.
What were they?
Well, first, he had a very low opinion of the public. He wrote that the understanding of the masses was feeble and that they had short memories.
Yeah, so he dumbed it down.
He dumbed it all the way down. He had 3 simple rules. 1, confine your message to a few bare essentials. No nuance. No on the one hand and the other hand.
Black and white, good and evil.
Exactly. 2, express those essentials in stereotype formulas, slogans, simple, repeatable phrases. And 3, repetition. Repeat those slogans over and over and over until the very last individual grasps the idea.
It sounds like modern advertising or a political campaign. Lock her up, build the wall, make America great again. It's all the same mechanism.
It is the foundation of mass communication. Keep it simple, make it emotional, and repeat it endlessly. But he also had a specific strategy for his enemies.
Go on.
The source calls it the pizza with ice cream analogy.
I love that image. In a dark way. Explain that.
Well, imagine trying to combine 2 things that are complete opposites, like capitalism, which is about private money, banks, and the free market, and communism, which is about destroying private money and banks. These are mortal enemies.
Right. You can't be both a capitalist and a communist. That makes no sense.
But Hitler needed to be against both. He had supporters who hated the big banks, and he had supporters who were terrified of a communist revolution. So he merged them. He found a way to blame one group for both.
The Jews.
The Jews. He said the Jews were the greedy international capitalists controlling the banks, and the Jews were the international Bolsheviks trying to destroy the nation.
So he created a single enemy that could be blamed for everything, no matter how contradictory.
Exactly. If you lost your savings, it's the Jewish bankers. If you are afraid of a workers' revolution, it's the Jewish communists.
Yeah.
It allowed him to unify all the anger and fear in the country under one specific target. It's illogical, like pizza with ice cream. But if you repeat it enough, people swallow it.
And he branded it.
He was obsessed with branding. He admitted in the book to copying the socialists. He saw their mass gatherings, their red banners, the energy, and he thought, I need that. But I need it to be better.
So he knew he needed a logo.
A powerful logo, the swastika. He talks about designing it to be effective on a poster, to create a first impetus of interest from a distance. He treated the Nazi Party like a product launch.
Let's talk more about the target of all this hate. We touched on anti-Semitism, but the source goes deeper into how Hitler's version of it was different.
Right, because anti-Semitism wasn't new. It's important to note, as the source does, that it wasn't unique to Germany. There was the Dreyfus Affair in France, terrible pogroms in Russia. It was a centuries-old European problem.
But traditionally, it was often based on religion, right? They killed Jesus, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Which meant in the past, if a Jewish person converted to Christianity, they could, at least in theory, be accepted into the community. There was an escape hatch, however narrow.
But Hitler shifted the conversation.
He slammed that door shut. He shifted it from religion to race to blood.
So conversion didn't matter anymore.
Nothing mattered. It wasn't about what you believed. It was about who you were. If it was in your blood, you were a pathogen, a bacillus. The dehumanization language is it's a critical step.
It's the psychological trick, isn't it? If you convince people that a group of humans is a virus, then eliminating them isn't murder?
It's sanitation. It's curing the nation. It makes genocide feel like a public health initiative.
And that target.
Yeah.
Well, that leads us to the darkest prophecy in the book, the part about the gas.
The source highlighted this, and I had to read it twice to believe it was real.
Me too. It's just so explicit.
It's one of the most disturbing parts of the book. Hitler is writing about his experience in World War I, and he says, if at the beginning of the war, 12 or 15,000 of these Hebraic corruptors were held under poison gas, then the sacrifice of millions would not have been in vain.
He literally mentions poison gas in 1924, years before the first concentration camp was even built.
He didn't explicitly write, I will build a Holocaust, but the intent and the method were right there in black and white for anyone to read. He was already fantasizing about industrial killing.
The other big target in the book, the other obsession, was the East, the concept of Lebensraum.
Living space. Hitler was obsessed with the idea that a great nation needs land to feed itself. He looked at Germany's borders and said, we are trapped. We are suffocating. We need room to grow.
But the source points out a massive flaw in his logic there, a scientific flaw that he just completely ignores.
A huge flaw. He ignored technology. By the 1920s, German scientists, Fritz Haber in particular, had invented artificial fertilizers. Agricultural technology was solving food shortages all over the world.
So you didn't need to conquer more land to feed your people.
You just needed better farming. But facts didn't matter to him. The logic didn't matter.
Why?
Because he wanted the war. He wanted the struggle. He wanted the land. Specifically, he wanted the Soviet Union. And this goes back to the two birds, one stone strategy we talked about.
How so?
By invading Russia, he could achieve two of his primary goals at once. First, he could secure the land for his living space, the vast farmlands of Ukraine. And second, he could destroy the center of what he believed was the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy running the USSR.
So the invasion of 1941, Operation Barbarossa, that was also in the book.
Explicitly. He stated that Germany's future lies in the conquest of the East. The blueprint was complete. He told everyone what he was going to do to the Jews and what he was going to do to Russia.
Okay, so we have the blueprint, we have the history. But the source video is titled, It Scared Me for Us, and it refers to 2025. This is where we get to the modern warning.
This is the part that might make some listeners uncomfortable, but we have to stick to what the source argues. The source explicitly connects the reading of Mein Kampf to modern political rhetoric in the United States in 2025.
The source is smart to mention Godwin's law right at the start of this section.
It has to. You know, the internet rule that eventually, in any argument, someone gets compared to Hitler. And usually that's just a lazy insult. If you don't like someone's policies, you call them a Nazi and the conversation is over.
But the source makes a very careful distinction here.
A crucial one. It says we shouldn't compare everyone to Hitler in terms of results. The Holocaust is a unique evil. It stands alone.
Oh.
But the source argues we can and should compare methods. We can compare the populist playbook, the mechanisms of persuasion, the rhetorical tricks.
So let's look at the parallels the source draws. It uses clips and quotes from the Magia movement and Donald Trump. And again, just to be clear for everyone listening, we are just reporting on the connections the source is making here.
Right. One of the strongest parallels is the concept of the enemy within.
Hitler had the November criminals, the socialists and Jews he claimed betrayed Germany from the inside.
And the source compares that to modern rhetoric about the radical left and referring to political opponents as vermin or the enemy from within. It's the same mechanism, telling the people that the real danger isn't a foreign army, but their own neighbors who vote differently.
Then there is the poisoning the blood quote. That was very direct.
That was a direct textual comparison. The source puts Hitler's words about the loss of the power of resistance that only pure blood possesses, right next to a quote from Donald Trump saying immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country.
It's the exact same phrase.
It is. And the source argues that even if it wasn't a conscious reference, it comes from the same dark well of nationalist, racialized thinking.
And it connects to the dehumanization of migrants, which the source also highlights.
Yes. Hitler used stereotypes to create a monstrous, frightening image of his enemies. The source plays clips of claims that immigrants are coming from insane asylums and are terrorists, that they aren't people, they're animals.
It's creating a scary other to blame for society's problems.
It's the single enemy strategy again. Simplify the problem. Who is to blame for crime? Immigrants. Who is to blame for taking your job? Immigrants. It's the Mein Kampf propaganda rulebook applied to a new target.
The source also talks about a sustained attack on institutions.
Yes. This is a big one. Discrediting the free press, calling it fake news or the enemy of the people. Hitler did the same, calling it the Lügenpresse, the lying press.
And attacking the justice system.
If the law goes against you, the system is rigged, the judges are corrupt, the FBI is corrupt. This systematically erodes public trust in the very institutions that are supposed to hold power in check.
There was a clip in the source about a third term.
That was the part that the source narrator said really scared them. It was a clip of a strategist talking about a potential third term for Trump and the need to seize the institutions and purge them of anyone who isn't loyal to the movement.
Seize and purge, that's very strong language.
It is. To make the government institutions, the civil service, the military, defendable by the movement. This is what the source calls the mechanism of populism. The playbook.
Run us through that mechanism one more time, because I want to make sure we understand the cycle the source is laying out.
It's a three-step cycle, and it's always the same. 1. Identify a crisis real or imagined. Maybe it's inflation, maybe it's crime, maybe it's the border. Fan the flames of that crisis.
Step 2.
Simplify the cause. Find a scapegoat. Blame a specific group for the crisis. It's their fault. And 3. Present a strongman as the only solution. The system is broken. Everyone is corrupt. I alone can fix it.
And that is the lesson of Mein Kampf, isn't it? It's not just a hateful memoir from the 1920s.
No. The source argues it is a manual. It is a manual on how to dismantle a democracy from within, using the tools of democracy itself. It reminds us that Hitler wasn't an evil genius. He was a symptom.
A symptom of a broken society.
A symptom of a broken society who knew how to exploit fear, anger, and humiliation better than anyone else.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what is the big takeaway? Where does the source leave us?
I think we have to go back to that comparison between 1923 and 1928. It's the most powerful point in the whole analysis, I think.
The chaos versus the stability.
Right. When the economy was stable in 1928, when people felt secure, the Nazis were a joke. When the economy crashed in 1929 and chaos returned, they took over the country in 4 years.
So the question the source leaves us with is, where are we now?
Does history rhyme? Are we in a 1928 moment where stability and institutions will hold and these radical ideas will fade away into irrelevance? Or are we in a 1923 moment where economic anxiety and political chaos are opening the door for something much darker?
And the other question that sticks with me is about believing them when they tell you who they are.
Yes. That is the final chilling thought from the source. Hitler wrote down exactly what he planned to do. He wrote it in a book, sold millions of copies, and told the world his plans for conquest and genocide. And yet, people refused to believe he would actually do it.
They thought it was just talk.
They thought it was hyperbole for the campaign trail. They thought the institutions, the generals, the businessmen would hold him back. They realized too late that he meant every single word.
So when politicians today tell you their plans, when they tell you they want to purge institutions or lock up their opponents, maybe we should listen.
We have to listen.
Yeah.
Because as the source says, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. And right now, the rhyme scheme is getting a little too familiar for comfort.
That is a terrifying but necessary place to end it. This has been a heavy one, but a really important one. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Stay curious and stay vigilant.
We'll see you next time.